The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. When Jesus had known that his hour had come to depart from this world and go back to the Father, he said to his disciples, "Very truly I tell you, you will weep and mourn, but the world will rejoice. You will have pain, but your pain will turn into joy. When a woman is in labor, she has pain because her hour has come. But when her child is born, she no longer remembers the anguish because of the joys of having brought a human being into the world. So you now have pain. But I will see you again, and your hearts will rejoice, and nobody will take your joy from you. On that day, you will ask nothing of me. Very truly I tell you, if you ask anything of the Father in my name, he will give it to you." The Gospel inspired by God. Whenever we read the Scriptures or we listen to the Scriptures being read, it's almost impossible for us not to default into a kind of a literal understanding of what we're hearing. That's the place we go to typically. So this morning is indicative of the same kind of thing. The context is, it's the Last Supper. Literally, it's going to be all over and done with within 24 hours. Jesus knows that. The disciples don't know that. So they think they're having a Seder meal. And it's the beginning. He's going to usher in the kingdom of God. He's going to be the Messiah, the King of Israel, and they're going to be important people. But this is their last meal together, and they don't quite realize what's happening. So this is his last kind of homily to them. And what he's saying to them is, you're going to be really, really sad, but the world is going to rejoice. But don't worry about it. We'll meet again, and then nobody will take that sadness away from you. So I imagine that after he died, and they're trying to not understand what this meant, and in the years after his ascension, they're on their own, that they're unpacking these statements and trying to make sense of them. And so initially, they'd go to this position, you're going to be really, really sad, but the world is going to rejoice. And I think, oh yeah, now we understand what he was saying. We were sad because he got killed, he got crucified. And the world rejoiced because the authorities were finally relieved and saying, whoa, we finally got rid of the troublemaker. And so that's how they're going to unpack it originally. You're going to be sad because you don't realize it now, but I'm going to get killed and I'm going to be gone. But the authorities are going to be really, really relieved that a troublemaker has been taken out of the equation. But, we'll meet again. And you're going to be together with me and you'll rejoice then. And they're thinking, okay, right. So one of two things is going to happen. He's going to come back, the second coming of Jesus, and they thought it was going to happen imminently. They were totally convinced it was going to happen, within weeks, that he's going to come back and usher in the kingdom of God. And then as the time began to drag, the second coming is put off again and again and again. And the second interpretation is, well, if the mountain won't come to Muhammad, Muhammad must go to the mountain. So he's not coming back to us. So what he really meant was that we're going to go and meet him in heaven. And so it's not that he's going to come back in a great cloud of glory, but that we're going to die, every one of us is going to die, and we're going to be reunited with him. So that's like the default position. That's the literalism with which we take that. There's a far deeper level to this. So what Christ is talking about is what's going to be taken from them and from every one of us is Christ consciousness. So it's not about Jesus being taken by being killed and dying, and then he's going to come back in his second coming, or we're going to go die and go back there. But every single soul goes through the same experience. Every single soul has a Last Supper, in what I call the launching pad. Before we decide to incarnate, there's the equivalent of a Last Supper. And we're going to realize we're going to be separated from our sense of Christ consciousness. We're going to be encapsulated in these physical bodies, and we're going to begin to identify with this spacesuit. We're going to think we are our egos, and our sense of Christ consciousness is going to be gone. And so there's this great sadness, in a sense, of the souls on the launching pad. They realize they're in for a really, really, really tough time. That they're going to forget. There's going to be amnesia for every one of us as to who we really are, who the neighbor is, and what the mission is about. So we're going to leave all of that. But the world is going to rejoice. What is the world? The world is the ego. The ego is going to be very, very happy to take over this enterprise and to act as if, this is who I am. I'm just a physical being with my emotions and my mind and my ego. So there's the world, and the world can be very, very happy to take over this kind of enterprise. So that's the division, that's the loss of Christ consciousness. But he says to us, but don't worry, we'll see each other again, and then nobody will take that away from you. There will come the time, the realization, and it's not just the life after death, when we suddenly realize who we really are, and we get reunited with our core self. But the object of the exercise is at some stage, in some incarnation, in some lifetime, to realize that while we're still enfleshed. We don't have to wait until we die to realize, oh my God, I can't believe it. I made the same mistake again and again and again and again and again. Every time I came down and I incarnated, I identified with the body. And I thought the ego was who I really was. Oy vey smear. I can't believe I did it again. At some stage, in some incarnation, we get to a place where we wake up during the incarnation. And then there's the Christ consciousness united. And then is the real rejoicing. We don't have to wait for some kind of an afterlife. And it's not about Jesus coming back in the clouds. It's about waking up. It's literally about self-realization. And that's the phrase that Hinduism will use for it. What we talk about Christ consciousness or salvation, or what the Buddha will talk about, awakening or enlightenment, the Hindu phrase for us is self-realization with a capital S. We realize who the self really is. And realize has two meanings. It means to cognitively understand, but it also means to make real, to act accordingly. So self-realization is not just a cognitive shift where you suddenly realize, oh my God, I've been identifying with my ego, and I'm not my ego, I'm the soul. It is that component, and it is then walking that talk, acting like that. Once you realize cognitively who the self really is, then you identify with it and you begin to walk that into your relationships. Now, Luke does his own version of this story in a very, very beautiful passage where Christ is speaking, and obviously Christ is speaking in Aramaic, although Luke is writing in Greek, and Christ says, you must be compassionate as your heavenly Father is compassionate. Now, in Aramaic, the word that's translated as Father, into English, is actually the Aramaic word is avon. The word he uses is avon. And avon is a gender-neutral term. It means birthing principle of the universe, that which gives birth to all that is. So it's not a gender-specific daddy with a beard. It is that principle that gives birth to everything that is. So Christ says, you must be compassionate like that. And the word compassion in Aramaic is the word rachamim. And rachamim is the plural of the word for womb. So what he's saying is, you must be womb-like, just as the birthing principle of the universe is itself a womb. And a womb is that which conceives, carries, and gives birth sequentially, not just once, but many, many, many times. So Christ is saying, you must be that kind of womb which keeps giving birth until finally you give birth to God. The first time we give birth to an ego. We think we are the ego. Then we begin to identify with our physical carcass. Then we begin to identify with our emotions. We think we are our emotions. Then we begin to identify with our minds. We think we are our ideas. Then we begin to identify with the relationships we're in. I'm such a person's child, or such a person's wife or husband or whatever. Or then we begin to identify with professions we're in. I'm the bus conductor, or I'm the farmer, or I'm the psychologist or whatever. And of course we're not any of these things. So Christ says, yeah, keep giving birth, keep giving birth, keep giving birth, until you finally come to realize that you are God, that our God is you, that you need to give birth to the realization that there is only God playing all of these parts. And at that stage, there's the unification has already happened. At that stage, nobody can take the joy away. Absolutely, you're totally right. There's the excitement, and there's the kind of anticipatory kind of anxiety about what the journey holds, and the realization that there's going to be a lot of forgetting. So your image is beautiful. Just yesterday, I had an email from Kenya yesterday from a couple I married in 1980 in a mission in Cabernet, and I don't know how the hell they got. They'd seen some homily someplace or other and made contact. And so I went on to Google Earth and I went back up to Cabernet, the second last mission I was in Kenya. And I was literally in tears. I was able to hone right in on the mission I built there. And I built it in honor of my grandfather, Daddy Jim. And I built it in the shape of a Celtic cross. And I could see it, I was now 6,000 feet above the earth, right over Cabernet, and I could see perfectly the image of the Celtic cross on the ground. And I started crying. Yeah, it was so nostalgic. It's like, I was there from 1979 to 1984, and then I moved on to another mission, my last mission there. So I built that mission around 1980. So that's like 36 years ago. So part of me was really, really nostalgic for the place I had left, and part of me is really, really happy that this is where I am now. So there's the nostalgia for the places we've been in, and at the same time, the excitement about the places we're about to visit. So you're absolutely right, it's this trade-off between the two. Yeah. I'm sure many times you go back, you visit places you lived in formerly, you know, and there's this wistfulness about it, you know, and the people you've left and, you know, haven't had contact with anymore, and at the same time, this is where you are. You know, you've got friends here, or you've got a life here. So there's this trade-off that you have. So I say two things to that. It's true, and it's only partially true. And it's a real pity to me that Western society in particular puts a stop to human evolution around the age of puberty. And so for the first 12 or 13 years, we're encouraged to evolve and to develop. So at some stage, you know, we're a little suckling infants. You know, at some stage, we start stringing our first words together, and everybody, oh, he said dada. He said dada. Did you hear him saying dada? We're really, really happy. And at some stage, the child, you know, is walking around, stumbling, and says, look, he took his first step today. Wow. And then at some stage, a child begins to develop the use of reason. They're not just learning rotely, they're able to actually think for themselves, and everybody's just excited about that. And then at some stage, they begin to think self-reflectively. And then that's when society says, okay, that's far enough now. You've evolved far enough. Because at that stage, that's the stage when teenagers begin to be critical of their own performance and of the performance of their parents and their society and their culture and their world. At that stage, you say, no, you're not allowed to criticize society. You've grown far enough now, stop growing now. You keep the rules, we'll tell you what to do. There's a group in charge, the oligarchy, whatever they are, they make, you know, the rules, we keep the rules, and you're going to be a troublemaker if you start thinking for yourself any further. So we put an end to the journey of self-exploration by our age 12, 13, 14. We're all very unhappy at that stage, because from then on, kids begin to ask, why are we sending drones across the world killing women and children in the Middle East? Why are we doing that? And we're told, you know, don't be asking those questions. There's people in Washington who make those kinds of decisions. So once we go from kind of ethnocentric thinking to eco-centric thinking or globally centric thinking, they want to put a stop to our growth. So we're being shut down, you know, literally being shut down by society. That's the first piece. The second piece, the realization, of course, is we never stop changing whatsoever. When people say you can't change your nature, every single breath you take, you're exchanging millions of molecules of matter with the environment. On a monthly basis, you change every single cell in your skin. Every single skin cell is changed in a monthly cycle. Within a 6-week cycle, every single cell in your stomach lining has gone. Within a 6-month cycle, every single cell in your skeletal system is changed. Within 7 years, every cell in your body has been replaced. And so we're constantly evolving physiologically. The same thing is true emotionally. You know, same thing is true intellectually. We're changing whether we like to believe it or not. So for anybody to say, you know, I am who I am, you know, I can't change. And what you're looking at, in fact, is you're watching that person just get more and more stultified, more and more stuck. And so what's changing about them is their stuckness. They are changing. They're changing to more and more stuckness, you know, less and less willing to kind of learn. And so they are changing, but they're changing by just getting more and more kind of obstinate. So for anybody to say that I am who I am, you know, I can't change, you know, that's not happening physiologically, it's not happening emotionally, it's not happening intellectually. So to hold this belief system so that I don't have to consciously move toward, you know, a perfection in the sense of perfection being committed to the purpose for which I incarnated. It's a contradiction in terms to make that claim, but a lot of us make it. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And so in some senses, you know, the image that's coming to me is somebody at the tiller of a boat. And so one person is holding the tiller and making a decision about how they're going to tack and where they're going to weave and what island they want to land on. So they're trying to take control of the process. The other person is in the boat, and the elements are determining where it's going to go, but it's not going to just sit where it is. It's going to wind up someplace in the ocean at some one of the islands. And so the environmental forces are determining where it's going to go. And it's not happenstance. So whether I have my hand on the tiller or whether I'm downstairs just drinking beers and the boat is taking its own course, it's changing. It's not going to wind up, if I come above deck, I'm not going to find the boat in the same place as when I went down. So the changes are happening consciously or unconsciously. But the progress is like this, it seems to me. And there's 4 things I think of. Is a person who's unconsciously doing the right thing is lucky. It's pure luck. A person who's unconsciously doing the wrong thing is asleep. A person who's consciously doing the wrong thing is pathological, and a person who's consciously doing the right thing is enlightened. And so there's these 4 kind of ways in which we navigate, and all of us are going to find ourselves in one of these positions at various stages. Almost none of us are fully awake all the time. These are the Buddha figures and the Jesus figures. So the rest of us are going to find ourselves typically, in one of the other 3 positions. So the question is, where do I do the most good, and where do I do the least damage in which of these other positions, and can I now consciously try to access that place? I was saying to the guys during the retreat, this notion of, have you heard people saying, my entire life flashed before me? People in very traumatic situations, or the life review in the near-death experience, where there's an entire life review from the perspective of everybody involved in each of the incidents, and happens just in seconds of human time. And I was trying to unpack what that might mean. There's 2 ways of unpackaging it. I'll just do one of them this morning. It's the realization that there are some events that totally trigger a focusedness in human beings, total consciousness, so that you're processing 2 things are happening. Sensorily, you're processing a whole bunch more information than you normally can, and intellectually, you're working with that material much faster than you normally can. So when you find yourself in a crisis situation, it's almost like all of the senses open up, and you're drinking in data at an extraordinary rate. And at the same time, your brain is processing the information at an accelerated rate. And therefore, time appears to be slower because you're doing a lot more work in the same amount of time. So it seems you think time must have stretched and slowed down for me to be able to process all this kind of information. So you find that with auto accidents and near-death experiences, that there's this extraordinary level of consciousness being totally present. So I'm able to drink in a whole bunch more data in the same amount of time, and I'm able to process the data a lot faster. And the example I came up with just a few days ago as I was rethinking this was, imagine the first solo flight that went across the Atlantic. Who was it? Who was there? Who was it? Lindbergh. Was it Charles Lindbergh? And so he went from the east coast of the United States across to Europe, and it took him, I think, over 24 hours. Was it more than, let's say 25 hours just for the fun of it. So this plane carries 1 person, and it takes them 25 hours to get across the Atlantic. You get onto a jumbo jet right now, and there's going to be 350 people on it, and it's going to go across from New York to London in about 5 hours. So you got 1/5 of the time, and you got 350 times as many people. So literally, you're 1,600 times more productive, now. You're schlepping 350 people in a 1/5 of the time than he did. That's what happens in these traumatic incidents. You're taking a lot more people aboard, and you're taking them there much faster. And so that's real consciousness. That's when you're totally on the ball. But to be in that space regularly, it takes a lot. You're burning up a lot of fuel, a lot of jet fuel to make that journey, to take all those people aboard and to make that journey. So most of us, we do these solo flights that take 25 hours. Yeah, it's fascinating. So, I think there's, let me say one last thing, we'll end. It's a disadvantage to have a multi-sensory experience in a sense. When you hear a story as a child, your imagination has to kick in, and kind of create the pictures of it. Yeah, but now you got a television set, you get all the senses are being fed information. So there's nothing left, to kind of have to make up the pieces in it. And so it appears like it's an advantage, that media are getting more and more complex. But the fact is they're taking over from us. We have spell checkers, so we don't need to spell anymore. We have calculators, we don't have to learn how to do math anymore. We have screens that are kind of feeding us, visually and auditorially, so we don't have to imagine stuff anymore. So the more of the human functions that machines take over, the less and less human beings are developing the ancient skills.